Creating player buy-in is so important, not just for the benefit of having a successful season, but really it allows coaches to build successful programs. And I've been recording this episode for the better part of 3 months because I've been trying to find the right way to really share what I've learned over time in how we as a coaching staff created player buy-in. But there's this elephant in the room that I feel like it needs to be addressed. But now that the regular high school basketball season has ended, I really feel that it is important for me to address the elephant in the room. And there's not a lot a coach can do by way of creating player buy-in if everyone involved in the process isn't bought in. And when I want to speak specifically to are us as parents. I wasn't privy to this information when I was coaching, and sitting in the stands and hearing the conversations and watching how, some parents have acted towards coaches. It is very detrimental to anything that a coach is trying to do. I think it's very important for parents to understand that the conversations that they're having on the way home, the conversations that they're having at the dinner table, all of those things matter. But the last couple years especially, but again, as you'll hear in this episode, more so post-COVID, I started to see that when we had negativity in our locker room, it was because it was coming from the outside. And it was because of the conversations that were being had outside of the time that our players were together. I've watched the full high school basketball season. I've gotten a chance to follow my daughter around and watch her play softball. So this isn't just for basketball. This is for athletics overall. It is very clear to me how important we are as parents to the health of the teams that our kids play on. And when things don't go well, we have to look at ourselves too, and we have to understand if we are being complicit in this whole process. 9 times out of 10, I've found that when things are happening in the locker room and they aren't going the way that they're supposed to be going, and the coaches are doing all of the things to foster positivity and productivity and culture building, it's because of the other people in our players' lives. And so I have to be very direct. I want to start this episode with this message so that hopefully you understand everything that I say after this is with the understanding that us as parents are bought into this process as well. If we can do that, if we can give our sons and daughters the best chance to be successful in their team environment, whether we fully agree with what the coaches are doing across the board, it will be a positive experience for everyone involved. They will learn a lot.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Please believe it or not, I'm still a cream of the crop. I was just until the age of 18 on the charts. Wasn't even dreaming this far. Believe who you are. The sun doesn't even know it's a star.
Welcome back to today's podcast. Today, we're diving into one of the most important and probably most misunderstood parts of running a successful program, and that's creating player buy-in. This episode is all about getting everyone in your program, your best players, your role players, your bench players, and even parents aligned with the mission. Because let's be honest, everybody wants buy-in, but very few people actually know how to build it. I can tell you, it doesn't happen by accident. It's intentional, it's strategic, and it requires communication. So today, I'm breaking down exactly how you can create it in your program, or at least show you how I tried to do it. Let's start with the foundation. What is buy-in? To me, buy-in is a combination of clarity, belief, trust, and the acceptance of your role. Players do not buy into a system just because you tell them to. They buy into people, they buy into relationships, they buy into coaches who communicate consistently and tell them the truth. Now, I can tell you that I wished all of this were true, but where I found the most resistance over the years was the telling the truth part. Sadly, I've had more players than I would like to admit that preferred that I told them what they wanted to hear as opposed to what was actually the truth. And the same went for their parents. You can feel buy-in when it's there. The gym has energy, the bench is alive, effort is consistent, leaders are vocal, and there's no drama in the locker room. You can also tell when it's not. So why does buy-in fall apart? A few reasons always show up. Roles aren't clear. Communication is inconsistent. Your stars are being treated differently. Bench players feel invisible. And sadly to say, parents. The biggest killer is unclear roles, followed by
parents. When players don't know where they stand, they create their own story, and it's almost always wrong. Your stars are the engine. If your best players aren't bought in, your culture has a ceiling. Here's the key: stars need responsibility, not privilege. Your best players should be held accountable first. They should be the standard setters. They should get clear expectations every week if you have to, and they should know that their leadership styles matter. I always made sure to meet with our top guys regularly, even if it was just 5 minutes here or there, but that went a long way. I would ask them questions like, what are you seeing right now? What are you hearing right now? What do you need from me? And when your star leads the right way, everything else becomes easier. When your star doesn't, nothing gets easier. I can tell you early on when I would ask questions, especially like, what are you seeing and what are you hearing? There were times where the players were a little apprehensive because they didn't want to be known as the op. They didn't want to be ratting people out. And we really tried to help them to understand that the information wasn't going to be used to get anyone in trouble. We just needed to know where we could be a resource to the group. And so over time, the trust was built and they understood why we were asking those questions. And it made it a little bit easier for them to share. When I talked about when your star doesn't lead by example, nothing gets easier. That is also true. You know, we've had times where our best player and our perceived leader wasn't bought into this whole process. And it was very, very difficult. And sadly, even when that player was gone, it took us some time to recover from that because they, as the leader, were the example that our young people look to. And so we had to kind of rework and reestablish what our culture was for the seasons that followed when we didn't have great leadership. Now, here's the real work. Getting the starters to buy in is one thing. Getting the kids who barely play to buy in, now that's a totally different story. The thing is, I found that bench players don't need equal minutes. They just need equal value, which is what they should always get. They need to feel seen. They need to feel important. They need to know exactly how they contribute. Some ways to help with that is, you know, when you're watching film, make sure, you know, for us, we always made sure that we were looking at effort. And in order to make our guys who were not going to get a lot of minutes feel that they were just as important, as we really pumped the effort part. And when they were playing hard, they were pushing the guys in front of them. If they pushed the guys in front of them, everyone got better. If everyone got better, we were able to create success as a team. And so in film, especially when we would sit down and watch film, we would talk about that. We would also celebrate scout team wins. Every time we had a competitive drill, and if it was like, you know, the first team against the second team or the third team, anytime the second or third team had an inkling of success, I went over the top to celebrate it, to the point where sometimes the first team guys, they would get frustrated because I literally would go over the top. But guess what? It made everybody better. And again, it made sure that the guys that weren't necessarily playing on game day knew how important they were to the group overall. And then, you know, the biggest thing is to give them specific roles, you know, praise the intangible things like communication, rebounding, physicality. But we had a young man that he was the leader in taking charges, right? He was the guy that without fail, if somebody was going to the basket, he was going to be right there taking a charge. And our teams got to be very athletic. And so teams to try to slow us down, especially with getting to the basket, is they would just step in and take charges from us. And so the next phase of our development as a group was playing on 2 feet. And so you could talk about playing on 2 feet all you want, but when you have a guy in practice every day that is going to stick his nose in there and is going to take a charge, it made guys mindful of the fact that it wasn't just about playing on 2 feet against teams who were taking charges. It was about playing on 2 feet all the time, because that was going to make them play more under control. And again, it leads to us being better. The truth is simple. Not everybody plays, but everybody matters. When bench players believe this, your culture becomes very special. This episode is being brought to you by My Jersey Designs. If you're looking for digital replica jerseys, go to myjerseydesigns.com and they'll take care of you. This might be the most important part of this episode because buying lives and dies with role communication. I think as a coach, you need to be clear early and consistent. I recommend, which is what we did, is having a meeting in the preseason. We would actually meet right before tryouts. We would meet with parents the day or 2 days before tryouts, and then we would meet again over winter break. So the conversations that we would have would be like, here's what you do well. Here's what your projected role is. If you were in the top 7, 8, maybe even 9 guys, we would definitely have that type of a conversation. If you were not, That was a different kind of a conversation, but one that needed to be had just as well. Here's what needs to improve. Here's the path to more minutes if that is what you're looking for. And then you need to make sure that that communication is happening. Like I said, we would do it before the season started and we would do it midway. Now, there might be some people out there that will continue to have those conversations. For me, it was very difficult because when you get into January, there are some Januaries where you will play more games than you have practice time. And so it is very hard to move the needle by way of wholesale changes. Now, God forbid somebody gets hurt or has some academic problems or gets in trouble, then everything changes. But if everything stays status quo, which is what we like in January, then it's very hard to make a really big change. What we did do, though, is every year in between the end of the season and the playoffs, that will be another opportunity to have a sit down with a guy, because at that point, their trajectory should continue to be in a positive direction. And we say again, if this is a time where you want to try to crack the lineup or to get more minutes in the playoffs for this next week to 10 days, this is what we're going to need to see out of you in practice. I found that doing it like this worked very well. Here's folk handle honesty. What they can't handle is surprises. Okay, so here we go. The biggest conversation in regards to the overall program is the playing time conversation. This is where the majority of issues come from: players, parents, and the locker room. I always stress this. We play 32 minutes in a high school game. There's 28 minutes in the JV game, and there's 24 minutes in a freshman game or a middle school game. So if you're not in that top 8 rotation, it's going to be tough to think that you can play a lot of minutes on a consistent basis. And again, even if we're keeping 10, 11, 12 guys, we always wanted to make sure that the value of every player in our program was felt. But what starts to happen when you get into this phase is when you start playing games and guys aren't playing per se, the people outside of our locker room start to infect the inside of our locker room. And so I'll get into how parents can play a part positively and how they may negatively impact the locker room. But I will say that those are the things that start to change players' approaches. When it came to playing time, we always wanted to make sure that players made that first contact. If one of our players was struggling or concerned or not happy about their role or their minutes, we always encourage them to initiate a conversation. And by all means, we were always willing to be transparent and have it. We would talk to them about what they can control. We would talk to them about the gap between where they are and where they want to be. And the biggest thing is understanding that if they are not playing as much, it's because there's somebody ahead of them that they need to prove that they could contribute at a better rate. We try to give them a plan. Here's what you're doing well. These are the things that for you to be able to earn more minutes. We found that having those transparent conversations didn't make everybody suddenly happy, but at least they understood the truth. Now, this is where it gets a little bit, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but this is where I would encourage parents to, this is the thing. There are some people that are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, oh yeah, because they understand the totality of what this scholastic experience is supposed to be. There's some parents that are going to be like, oh, forget him. What is he talking about? I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And those aren't the people I'm trying to reach. It's the people on the fence. And so for the folks that can get something out of this episode, and then you have your friends that may be on the fence and they can go one way or the other, try to grab them and just help them to understand the perspective of where they contribute, where are they complicit in this entire experience? Because parents are a big part of how this all goes. I would love to think that when we build our culture and we grow it and it's super tight, that our locker room is going to be absent of any conflict. But I know that even though we spend a lot of time together, the rest of the time our guys spend with their family and their friends and the people who influence them just as much. And so when we start to have problems in our locker room, 9 times out of 10, it's not because of the people inside the locker room. It's because of the people outside of it. And so I know that parents aren't the enemy. I've said this before. Parents, their priority is their child. For us coaches, our priority is everybody's children. It is the entire program. And so sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes there is the priorities are a little bit different. As a parent, if you understand that to be true and you do not act emotionally in your decision making process, this could be a little bit better. I think that if you communicate with parents early, so that they don't have to assume, so that they don't start to fill in the gaps that I talked about earlier when you don't communicate well with the players, I think you have a better chance. I know that over the past couple few years, I would say post COVID, when everything started changing in the recruiting landscape, I feel like everything got ratcheted up by way of there being more potential for conflict with parents. There's less of a understanding of this is a total team experience and more about what can be done for my kids specifically. So I still try to avoid that by, again, having a meeting in the preseason. We would have our parent meeting before tryouts. We would lay out our standards. We would talk about team values. That is the time where we would talk to them about our mission statement and our vision statement. We would talk about playing time expectations. We would communicate boundaries. Parents, we have this 24-hour rule. If there's something that you really need to talk to us about, let's make sure we're not doing it on game day. And it's not even about having an opportunity to meet and communicate when cooler heads prevail, but you also have to consider the example that you're setting for your child. If you as the adult, if you as the person that are in charge of developing a young human being, if you can't act accordingly, what example are you setting for your kid? And so, yes, because we love our children and we want them to do the best that they can, it can get emotional at times, but that should not guide any type of conversation that we have with another grown-up, especially one in charge of helping to be a part of the development process with your child. And then we would tell them what we would and would not discuss. So, for example, if a parent comes up and says, why isn't my kid playing? That's not a conversation that we want to be having. And it's not that we're not going to have it at all. It's just we're not going to have it first. I said earlier, if your child is curious or upset or frustrated about their playing time, by all means, we will talk to them about that. Now, if we have a meeting with the child, with the player, and it is unsatisfactory to the young man, then they have every opportunity to then go to their parent, discuss it, and then we would have a whole meeting. But I can tell you that over the years, first of all, we very rarely had players come in and be like, I don't understand why I'm not playing more. They knew what was going on because they were in practice every day and they knew what was happening. But again, the times that we did, if it ever got to the point where they needed their family to come in, we would have them come in. What was challenging is most of the time it was the parent that was upset, and now we have to have this meeting and the players sitting there and they're embarrassed. Their heads down. They don't want to talk at all because the parent is upset about something that they are not. And so again, it goes back to what example are we setting? We had one situation where this young man was really upset. He was struggling because he was someone who over the years he played a lot. When they were in middle school, he was the guy. And then he stopped growing. And then he became a 6 foot tall 4-man. Well, that doesn't bode well in the Commonwealth. And his parents still had this expectation of what he was. And so we're sitting in this meeting and they're upset about the fact that this is going on. And they asked me what I was going to do about it. And I pushed back and I said to them, or I asked them what they were going to do about it, because his struggle at that point, it was emotional, it was psychological, it was all of the above. But the biggest thing was he didn't feel like he was good enough. And the reason why he didn't feel like he was good enough is because in practice, he knew that there were guys that were better than him. But when he got home, his parents reminded him of just how invaluable he was. And again, they didn't do it on purpose, but they wanted to place the blame at my feet, and it wasn't my fault at all. And so as we continued to have that conversation, I don't know that I ever got it totally through to them as to what their role was, because they were not willing to accept how complicit they were in this experience. But that was one of those points or in time as a coach that I realized that it's not always going to be perfect. And so now that I'm in a situation like this, I get to, I don't know, in a less threatening way, I get a chance to say, hey, parents, because I'm one as well. Both of my kids have had coaches outside of me, and we didn't love all of their experiences, but they were all valuable. And so if our children were not being harmed emotionally or psychologically, but maybe it was a little bit uncomfortable, then so be it, because that's life. And again, they are better off for it. At least that's the way we took it. The big thing about playing time is everybody thinks that they need to score to get on the court. Like I know, if you play some defense, it is very likely that you're going to find your way on the basketball court. And so even in our guys that were starters, we would have to have these conversations about this whole scoring thing. There's not enough basketballs to go around if everybody's trying to get 30. And it doesn't work that way. And so that is another one of those things that parents have to accept. When you look at the makeup of a team, everybody wants their player, their child, to be, I don't know, the focal point, the face of, but that's not always in the cards. And again, when you think the long game, when you think of ultimately, what are we trying to get out of this experience? That all should play a part into how this all goes. For the most part, when parents feel respected and informed, everything usually does run a little bit smoother. If you've gotten this far, please hit the like button so that we know that you appreciated this episode. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the platform that you are receiving this podcast. We very much appreciate it.
Standards matter, not rules, standards. Rules are things players can't do. Standards are things players choose to do because they want to be great. When buy-in slips, you'll notice. You'll start to see cliques. You'll start to see benches that are sitting quietly. They're not cheering for their teammates or particular teammates. Players are constantly starting to question decisions. I think the biggest thing a coach can do is address it early. You can redirect culture. You can redirect how things are going in November. At this point of the season, in February, it's a lot harder. And so for teams going into the playoffs, this may be something that you'll have to consider moving forward. Here are some things I think you can implement immediately. Again, while we're at the end of the regular season and moving into the playoffs, these are still things that are important and can help a team have a successful playoff run. Have weekly check-ins with every player. In the offseason, have accountability charts. We would have workout warriors, and we would chart, if we had a certain number of workouts and how many of our guys attended those workouts. And whoever attended the most workouts, they would get recognized as the workout warrior. As you're still practicing, recognize your scout team. Find a way to do that. A thing that we did was leadership groups. In the offseason, we would have like these pods. And the pods were really an opportunity for there to be someone put in a leadership position, and they will be in charge of a number of players. Pod group will be a number of 5, and this will be every person moving into the high school realm. So this will be rising freshmen, JV, and potentially varsity players moving into the next year. We will put a person in charge of each group. It helped with communication. And so I would send messages out to the pod leaders. The pod leaders would then be in charge of getting that information out to their group. We made sure that the pod leaders were people that weren't necessarily going to be captains, but they were people who we either wanted to help grow their leadership or people who we saw as the leaders of the future. And so this also helped in helping with our culture being spread and disseminated, especially with our young people. It allowed for there to be smaller groups of people who were connected to each other, and we made sure that friends were not in the same groups if possible. And when it got to the point where friends were in every group, that was a good thing. But for the most part, we put people in charge of maybe players that they may not be as familiar with. And we made sure that each of the groups had players from each class. And so that there was an opportunity for the young people to have an influence on the younger guys. We would give players ownership in potential drills that we wanted to use in practice. Touching base with our guys periodically really helped with that. But, if somebody had either an idea or there was something that they really like to do, we would give them the opportunity to run those particular drills. And that really helped. These things, they were small, but they created a lot of trust within our group. Let me leave you with 2 big ideas. Mine comes from clarity. If kids know their role and feel valued, you eliminate 90% of your problems. And while that other 10% is very important, parents, if kids feel valued, again, things can go well. Buy-in is built through consistent conversations, not speeches. You don't convince a team in one dramatic meeting. You build it day by day through communication, honesty, and connection. Buy-in is not something you demand. It's something you develop over time. Thank you for listening. I hope this helps you build a stronger and more connected program. See you next time.